Well, hello and welcome to the Conversations. You're with Janine Mason, and this is Authentic Conversations, the messy intersection between faith, family, and work. And so today I want to talk to you about being offended. And sometimes in the church, what happens is that we hear the word offended and we think offenses and bitterness, and we're like, the air got sucked out of the room. I can't admit that I was offended with anything. The truth is that we live in a society where there's a lot of offensive stuff happening. I am actually really quite offended at the thought that people are aborting babies. I'm offended at the thought that people are mutilating kids in the name of them having freedom to choose their gender. There's a lot of things that you and I could agree that are really offensive and that I can get offended about. Here's the thing that I have noticed about being offended is that if I don't watch out, it will steal my focus and it will steal my energy. I can spend a lot of time fuming, getting mad, um, sort of marinating in the emotion of being offended. And I can also let it take my focus from the things that I'm called to do. And so I believe that I'm called to stand up in anywhere that I am. If I'm in a school board meeting and something like that comes up, I'm going to speak the truth and I'm going to speak out. But there's a difference between that and making it somewhat of a mission on social media or getting on a soapbox in some other way to champion a cause that isn't mine to champion. And so I bless the people that are called to some of those tricky issues that are happening in our world today. But I also know that for me in this season, at least, those are not my issues to really get on the soapbox about. But I've noticed that again, that many of us are losing our energy and losing our focus because of being offended. And so I want to share a few things that have helped me um, to learn to not get offended as easily. I'm still on that journey. I would say I'm the package deal for an easily offended person. I'm a strong personality. I have strong opinions. I have a high discernment meter, so it's easy for me to see through things that other people are fooled by. And I also have a really high degree of integrity and desire for integrity. And so when I see people who it appears are not living up to what they say, that's an easy recipe for me to be offended. And so I have spent years fighting that and spending a lot of energy on that. And really, it came to a head for me during COVID in 2020, which had so much to be offended by, and so many people are offended with the other half, the people that believe differently than them. And so I think for me, what it did was it highlighted how much energy we as believers, sadly, how much energy we were spending at throwing mud at the people who believe differently than we did. And it wasn't over truth or non-truth. Much of it was over opinion. I think this and you think that. And so the Bible's pretty clear that we're not to get bogged down with, whether you eat meat or don't eat meat. I'm a meat eater. I like a good steak. We're not to get bogged down with, should I drink alcohol or not drink alcohol? We're really to be concerned with how to honor one another in the midst of our differences. And so, again, I want to share a few things. The first one is that people have choices. And as much as you don't like it, people might have a choice that's different than you. Years ago, when my kids were younger, they had a Wednesday night meeting at the church. And at Bethel Church, that meant you drove up the hill and you drove round a loop to pick them up. And the idea is that you drive the loop, you don't park in the loop because that holds everybody up. And so I would be diligent, I'd drive and then I'd pause and wait to see if my kid turned up outside the door. And if they didn't and a car came up behind me, I would drive around. And sometimes that actually meant that I then did get stuck behind people who parked. And week after week, I would get really frustrated because I was following the rules. I was doing the right thing and other people weren't. And I was really offended and I would get actually quite mad. And finally, it seems crazy, but, it was draining energy from me because I'd be so frustrated. By the time my kid got in the car, I'd be really frustrated. So finally I talked to the Lord about it and I was having a bit of a moan and saying, God, why doesn't, why don't the security people come and tell them off? Why don't they move them on? Why do these people do that? And I felt like the Lord said, you could make that same choice any day you like. Why don't you make the same choice? And I sat back and I thought about it. I thought, well, I have decided to honor the Lord in everything I do, even in the little things that nobody sees. And so for me, that means honoring people, honoring the way that it's set up to work, this loop, driving the loop thing, honoring the people that would come behind me, not holding them up. And so honoring the Lord looks like driving the loop, not parking in the loop. And I said, well, that's why, God, I do that because I want to honor you in everything that I do. That's the choice I've made. And I felt like the Lord said, but not everybody's going to choose that same thing. And whether they choose it because they don't see that, they haven't chosen to honor the Lord, or they do, or whether they choose it because they just don't see it that way, it didn't matter. But I suddenly felt like, oh, I have the power. I do this, the right thing, what I considered to be the right thing, because that's who I want to be. And recognizing that not everybody will see things the way I see them. And so it helped me not to be offended by the people that didn't do that parked there for 20 minutes while they waited for their kid to come out, because I thought I could choose to do that. But instead I feel powerful to choose to do the thing that honors the Lord. And God, I give you this as a willing sacrifice to honor you in all that I do. So that's my first key, is recognizing that people have choices and that they won't always make the same choices because they have a different background and a different set of internal values than you do. My second point, I'll need to put my glasses back on to actually see. The second thing, and this is probably the main thing, honestly, that helps us, is recognizing that although, like I said at the start, although I hate that children are being mutilated as somebody gives them permission at a young age to change gender, I hate that. And if it was happening within my sphere of influence, I would stand up and make a sound. I speak up where I have opportunities. But in terms of the nation's laws, in terms of having a voice into that sphere, I simply don't have a voice. And so getting all riled up and spending lots of energy and emotional energy and mind time on that issue simply distracts me from what I'm called to do. And so I think part of us not living with the drain of energy, the drain of time and focus by being offended by different things is saying, yep, I'm offended by that. I hate that this is happening. I will look for opportunities where they are. But I also recognize that it's outside my ability to influence at this time. And so I am not going to spend longer than just a few minutes thinking about that. So I read the news that way. I look at it, I'm horrified at times by the things I read. I'm elated at the good news, and I move on, and I don't give it really any more space in my mind than those few minutes that I spend looking at it. I might pray if the Lord highlights something, but I don't let it distract me from what I'm called to do. So part of it is knowing what you're called to do. The third thing I want to say is that has helped Andy and I is someone, and I can't remember who, forgive me if it was you, and I'm not giving you credit, but somebody talked about actually that oftentimes when people are making crazy decisions, it's because they're blind. And we don't get mad with a blind person for not being able to see, yet we oftentimes get mad with somebody for not seeing or understanding things the way that we see them or understand them. And so I have a friend that's walking through crazy business stuff and crazy family stuff. And as her family is making these crazy decisions, and we talked about seeing them as blind rather than just being so frustrated. And it enabled her to just give grace, to say they just simply don't understand, they don't see. And so instead of spending a lot of emotional energy, does the situation still hurt? Is it still painful and frustrating? Yes. But it gives you ability to release grace when you realize that they're not trying to hurt you, they're not trying to be awkward or difficult. They are simply making decisions that are different than yours based on their, sometimes, yes, their fear, but all the background, everything that made them, be the person that they are today is the things that go into them making those decisions. And oftentimes it's because they're blinded by fear. They're blinded by their own personal experience. So I think back to 2020, before 2020. I think about the Janine that was before 2020, the one that was easily offended by people and by a lot of things. And I have learned to let it go a lot more. Our son hates the movie Frozen, and the girls at one point loved that movie. And so they would tease him by singing the song, Let It Go, Let It Go. And, I think that's the thing that I have had to learn to have as a theme song, Let It Go, because I just can't afford to let being offended steal my energy. I want to give everything I am to honor the Lord. I want to give everything that I am to be on task, on mission, on point for what He has for me to do in the earth today. And I don't want to let being offended by things that are outside my control take my time and take my energy. So post 2020, the Janine that you see in front of you is a far less offendable Janine. I have learned to just say, somebody believes differently than me on vaccines. They believe differently than me on politics. And as I see us coming in the US towards another election next year, and I see things ramping up with the things that are being released on the media, my encouragement to you would simply to be, hey, can you honor the person that has a different set of beliefs, a different set of criteria, even for how they make their decisions and their choices, and be gracious and just be a little bit less offendable. The thing I think I want to say last is that so much of our offendedness turned up, and I'm using that offendedness rather than offense, because I'm not talking about you being carrying offense and bitterness in your heart. I'm simply saying that you got offended. Many of us got offended with the people on the other side of the fence on all the myriad of issues, masks, vaccines, Trump, all sorts of crazy stuff. And I want to ask you, how many times, so much of that played out on social media, and I want to ask you, when's the last time that you had your mind changed by something that you read on Facebook over something important? Your answer is probably never, because you generally don't go into social media to have your mind changed. You look on social media for people that agree with you and you champion them, and then the people that disagree with you, you look at them and you might want to comment negatively and try and convince them, argue with them to change their minds. And the truth is that's a really bad really bad forum for changing people's minds. The best place to even begin to go down that road is to come and sit at a table together with the mindset of, I'm here to learn why you're choosing, why you believe what you believe. And as I do that, then I'm maybe in the position to tell you why I believe what I believe. Right before I sat down to do this podcast, I had a text from one of our kids, and she was asking me, hey, she's at a pre-law thing at UPenn, a summer program, and they had to choose a case to do some homework on. And she's 16. She said to me through text, she said, so there was this case in the Supreme Court about the people that didn't want to work for somebody from the LGBTQ community. Should I choose that case? Is it okay to even look at that case as a Christian? And so I text back to her and said, absolutely. It would be great for you to choose that case and to look and to stand on either side of the fence and to try and discover why people on one side of the argument are saying the things that they're saying, and then to sit equally on the other side of the argument as a Christian and say, this is why I believe I have the right to choose this way. Um, hey, hey, church. Hey, believers of Jesus Christ. There is so much out there we can get offended by. Please, I encourage you, I implore you, let this be a season where you learn to let things go, where you learn to see that sometimes people are blind, where you learn to see that people have choices and they'll be different than yours, and that you simply say, we don't agree, but unless we're going to sit down and have a chat and hear one another's heart, I'm not going to let it ambush me. I'm not going to let it take my time. I'm not going to let it take my energy or my focus. I bless you to make the choices you make, and I'm going to make the choices I make. I'm only responsible for those. And so I bless you in this season to be less offendable. I bless you to have the wisdom to know when to speak up and when to stay silent. And I bless you to be in this season where you don't have to, in a sense, feel like you have to have the last word or have to be right on any issue, but they have enough grace and courage on the inside of you just to let things slough off your back like a water sloughs off a duck's back. And so I bless you this week to be less offendable.